Dan and I and Treasury, SBA
but
had
also
some
do
good
some work on
internal
migration
conversation
security, all the
about possibly doing some type of session around
But it's it's great. We're reaching somewhere along the border once a month.
for our SC2 kickoff.
San Diego.
Let's try to get together. I am actually having lunch with a congressman.
Yeah, that's fine.
But let me. I only have a 2 o'clock and then I'm gone.
Washington, they're
I have a lunch and then a 2 o'clock. I'm good for the rest of the day. Are you in town?
Yes, I'm in town.
I mean, a lot of people talk about border security.
Definitely, yeah.
But they're actually sort of
We're busy putting it together.
Well, you're just moving up in the world here. You've got a lot of titles here. Team lead Brownsville,
This is the initiative I'm working on.
White House Council on Strong. Are you the resiliency officer?
Sort of, but it's
For
it's White House Council, not Rockefeller Office, but more like the Institute.
Strong communities. The EPA. Oh my
That's
gosh.
my home agency, who donated me to work on this initiative.
yeah, we need more voices here. Actually talk about it for the more perspective, the better, right? I mean, both in terms of proactive actually building things going forward, but also just
Hold that one for me.
They're heavy.
spout it around sometimes. We need that too. Tough job, but let's pass these bad boys out.
I'll include some in my presentation today. And certainly give you a complete database of projects by state.
Make sure that this request of yours.
45. And then that's only 15%, that's paid in. The difference is just pledged to call it account. You know, when you hear that, full faith and credit in the US government, well, that's basically what it is. Because essentially what we do, we get 15% of the money and then we borrow another $1,000. We're leveraging that by doing it to 100 million. So 22.5 million. 225 million credits globally. We borrow. Sure. I'd love to visit you whenever you're here.
Hi, Chris Wilson from Mexico Institute here. Thanks very much for coming. Of course, Jordana, we have on next door. She's the esteemed author of this report. So, yeah, thanks very much for taking the time to come down here today and doing
Just trying to get it.
this. Obviously,
So you're in Dallas or El Paso?
I'm in San Antonio.
In San
Yeah, yeah. So I'm at the branch there. I'm in
Okay.
Dallas a lot because of our home office. But
Now, how is it that you guys get?
Oh, yeah?
The Federal Reserve gets involved?
having participated in the economy possible and understanding what's keeping people back from participation. So that's what my job in
Challenges that immigrants from so many different
several areas. Industries like
when they come here.
today.
They leave families over here because of
Workforce development.
Good, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be together. We're right down the
Yeah, that's right.
And Keta Caballero
Oh, yeah.
helped me so much to understand the
Get the sister, Estela worked
Yes,
with me.
yes, I met Stella briefly.
Yeah.
was an officer with General Carranza. Wow. He said, look, send me and travel with you. Send Yes,
Or,
yes.
like,
What do you think, should we should start?
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay,
As long as you can and we understand.
are we ready?
Signal whenever you need to take a room.
More valuable.
No, I have an extra pen. I seem to have misplaced it.
A pen?
Yeah, these. Can you grab us a couple of these speakers just so they have their list?
Damn it, I have to have an extra pen. Mine disappeared. All my friends at HUD, I don't know if he was gonna be here today, but they're gonna watch the live streaming, so, because I wanted to talk to him about what you.
We ready? Okay, I think we'll get started. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Blair Rubel. I'm Vice President for Programs here at the Wilson Center, and also run the Urban Sustainability Lab, and this event is in partnership with our colleagues from the Mexico Institute. We're very pleased to welcome you to the seminar and to host a really distinguished panel of speakers, and I know you're in for a treat. We're Chris Wilson, whom I think most of you know, but if you don't, you'll hear from in a moment. Chris and I were just speaking with Congressman Hinojosa, and he was talking a little bit about his family history, and what is striking is how much continuity and change there is on issues of immigration and the border, and it's a really important moment, and it's an important moment because we're going to hear a really wonderful report, but I think when you hear about the report, please just remember that there are family histories represented in each and every page of this report. And I was reminded of that in our brief conversation a moment ago, and I think it's always important to bring the human element into reports such as this, because as you'll hear, this is really a superb document, and it's available online, and it is a way of looking forward, but is very much rooted in reality and communities along the border. And that reality is one in which human beings are facing challenges. And one of the challenges they have is how to leverage the region's assets for the benefit of people who live in the region. And therefore, I think this is really an important document. I congratulate the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas for working on this, and Jordana Barton, who is the author and the lead figure, the animating force on this project. So I on behalf of the Wilson Center, I want to welcome everyone and remind people that behind every image and every page is a story, and it's important to remember the human dimension of what we're talking about. I also want to mention Habitat 3, which is many people in this country really haven't focused on, but it's the major UN world meeting on human settlement. It happens every 20 years, and the next meeting, Habitat 3, will be in Quito, Ecuador in about a year. And the Wilson Center is a member of the U.S. National Committee to prepare for Habitat 3. And what is important is a lot of the issues that we're talking about here have international resonance. And we're co-chairs of a subcommittee that is supposed to link American experience with international experience on human settlements. And I think this report is really an important document um, because it highlights some of the best of American experience as well as some of the challenges that we have. And there are direct connections, I think, to the issues that will be discussed in Habitat 3. So if you haven't paid attention to Habitat 3, I hope you'll begin to do so. I see some of our colleagues from HUD here and some of the people who have been working, preparing the U.S. government position for Habitat 3. And this event is very much in the spirit of what we hope will happen over the next 12 months. Finally, it's great for us to be working with the Mexico Institute. All of us in the urban team sit in offices that are interspersed with our Mexico Institute colleagues, but we rarely get to actually cooperate.
That's right.
So it's really a pleasure to be able to work with Chris Wilson, who's Deputy Director of the Mexico Institute, Duncan, and all your colleagues on this wonderful event. And I'm about to turn the floor over to Chris to moderate the meeting, but I will just mention that it's being webcast. So we will ask that you speak into microphones so that all the people who are trying to follow it on the internet will be able to hear what's being said. Chris?
Thanks very much, Blair. Thanks to all of you for coming out here today. Chris Wilson, I'm Deputy Director of our Mexico Institute, and I also get the opportunity to lead our work on the U.S.-Mexico border, which, as you can all imagine, involves quite a number of topics, some of great influence and there's a lot of political voice in Washington about things like migration and security, and some that probably don't get their fair shake here in Washington. Some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today, addressing poverty, economic development, community development in the border region. But those are the issues that when I get to travel the border quite a bit, I'm actually going to San Diego and Tijuana tomorrow. Those are the issues that I hear about when I talk to people who live in the border region. It's a very different conversation than the one that we too often are having here in Washington. And so I think it's really important that we have this opportunity to have a conversation that's really more in tune with the needs of the border region itself here today. This is obviously a specific issue. There are a wide array of issues across the U.S.-Mexico border, but we're delighted to be able to have the conversation here today. And thanks definitely to Jordana for helping us organize the panel, and to the Federal Reserve, and obviously for also putting together this great report that we're having the opportunity to discuss today. I'd like to begin. We have an introduction by Congressman Ruben Hinojosa. So I'm really happy to have you with us here today. Someone who's represented the border in a very strong way for a long time in Congress. We don't actually have too many representatives from the border districts that have been working in Congress and working on these issues for the number of years and that have the expertise that you do. And certainly someone who works in committees such as Committee on Education and Workforce Development, Committee on Financial Services, now chairman of the Subcommittee on Higher Education, Lifelong Learning, and Competitiveness, and also chair of the Hispanic Caucus in Congress. I mean, there's not really a better resume for someone to have delved into the issues that we'll be talking about here today. And I know someone who cares also specifically about the issue of the colonias, the immigrant population in your district, and some of the impoverished population in your district. So thank you very much for being with us here today, and I'll just pass it over to you, and I'll introduce the rest of the panel in just a second.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very kind of you to give such a generous introduction. I think that in my opening remarks, I want to repeat something that the Pope said when I first heard him here in D.C. And he said he was proud to be the son of immigrant parents. Well, I too am such. I was sharing with some of our friends here at the front panel here that 105 years ago, my mother was 5 years old in Chihuahua, Chihuahua, and her father told the family that he was going to be sending the entire family to McAllen, Texas. From Chihuahua, Chihuahua to McAllen must be over 850 miles. At that time, the only way they could get there was by horse-driven carts. And because he was an officer with General Carranza during the Civil War of 1910 to 1917 in Mexico, he told the general that the only way he could go with him through this war was to send his family away from violence and danger that they had if you read the history, you'll see that Pancho Villa traveled all along that Texas-Mexico border and many other bandits. Bottom line is, my mother landed in McAllen many months later. My father came from Tamaulipas, Reynosa Diaz, which is very close to Mission, Texas, and La Jolla in that area. He was 9 years old, the oldest of 4 brothers and sisters who had lost their father during that war. And many, many years later, they met as adults, and they had 11 children, 7 boys and 4 girls. I happened to be number 8. And so I remember many of the stories that were told by my parents, especially my mother. My dad did talk to us at the dinner table and tell us why it was so important that he, who had been blessed with experiences that gave him the ability to farm a rented 40-acre tract of land and had a little grocery store. And having 11 children, he had enough manpower to work at the farm and run the grocery store. And all of this to say, he was the one that would receive some of the uncles and aunts who came from Mexico and were looking for work. So this study that was done by the Federal Reserve Bank is of great interest to me because I have grown up in that area. All 11 children were born there in the Rio Grande Valley. And so we know and understand the hardships of the people who are talked about in this Innovation in Colonias on the Texas-Mexico border study that was done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So I want to say good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today in such distinguished company to discuss and explore holistic approaches to community development in our Texas-Mexico border communities. First, I would like to thank the Wilson Center and its Mexico Institute Deputy Director, Chris Wilson, for hosting the most important panel discussion today and for its commitment to fostering a closer relationship between the peoples of the United States and Mexico. Secondly, I would like to thank the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas with special thanks to Jordana Barton and her community development team, including Roy Lopez, who is my brother-in-law, for the tremendous work they did in producing the report that I just mentioned. This report is truly a game changer for the 500,000 residents living in the 2,000 plus colonias that dot the Texas-Mexico border. Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you know, I have the privilege of representing the 15th District of Texas, a dynamic, unique district that stretches from Guadalupe County, southeast from San Antonio, all the way down 250 miles to deep South Texas along the border with Mexico. Since being elected into Congress in 1996, I've made it my mission to improve the quality of life of the men and women and children in my district. And to that, I can proudly say I have made great progress, although I will admit there's still much work to do. By vigorously fighting to increase federal investments in education, healthcare, workforce development, rural housing, and economic development and infrastructure, my district has made astounding economic progress. During my tenure in Congress, employment in my district has increased at a faster and steadier pace than in the United States, Mexico, or Texas as a whole, with the unemployment rate dropping from a whopping 22% when I was sworn in to 7.7% today. When I came to Congress, I made a commitment to improve educational opportunities and increase literacy for all, from cradle to career. Over the past 19 years, as a senior member of the House Education Committee and the Workforce Committee, I have unrelentingly promoted an increased focus on accessibility and affordability in higher education. I heard that from the presidents of universities and community colleges. I heard that from chancellors of university systems when I became the chairman of the subcommittee for higher ed during 4 years. Through hard-won battles, I have worked with my Democratic colleagues and a few Republican members in Congress to increase federal investments in Pell Grants for needy students, as well as reform how student loans are financed, strengthen the capacity of Hispanic-serving institutions and HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions, particularly in the STEM fields, as well as in vocational and technical associate degree programs, and expanding educational opportunities for all. And education is truly a transformative key that has the power to unlock unlimited potential and opportunity in all those who hold it. Many of our social ills can be tied to a lack of education and opportunity. Without basic knowledge, literacy skills, a high school diploma, and a college degree, it's extremely difficult for anyone to access good-paying jobs and fully participate in society and our democracy. In meetings with constituents across my congressional district, I make sure to underscore the importance of education K through 16 and the economic opportunities it creates. I encourage and inspire students to take rigorous academic courses, including math and science and computer science and financial literacy, to prepare them for college and future employment. 14 years ago, together with President Dr. Miguel Nevares of the University of Texas Pan American in Edinburgh, Texas, I spearheaded the creation of the Hispanic Engineering, Science, and Technology Initiative, known as HESTEC. It was done in order to promote careers in STEM fields. I am proud to say that since 2010, enrollment in STEM courses has increased by 41% at that university, and we have graduated over 2,000 students in engineering and increased enrollment of women up to 34%. We started with 0 women in the School of Engineering, and today we brag that they're 1/3, 34% are females. We need to realize that 57% of the high school graduates are female, and 54% of the graduating college students are female. So we must take advantage of the opportunity to introduce them to STEM fields. Our 3 community colleges have also played a pivotal role in increasing educational attainment levels in our region and in preparing our students for good jobs and careers. South Texas College, known as STC, which started out as a small community college of 1,000 students and is now one of the largest Hispanic serving institutions, hitting record high enrollment this year with 34,641 students, most of whom are Hispanic. I'd say 90%. As founding chairman of the Board of Trustees of STC, it swells my heart with pride to know that the college currently has 5 state-of-the-art campuses, 3 teaching centers, 1 virtual campus, and now offers 4 baccalaureate degrees in applied technology and applied science. Naysayers said it could never happen. We'd had 3 elections to start a community college and all failed over a 25-year period. Nobody wanted new taxing districts. I took on the challenge and I put together Democrats and Republicans and some that didn't know what they were. And together, I steered them to a successful election of 62% in favor of the community college taxing district and the balance against it. I must add that we in South Texas have made tremendous progress in my congressional district because of the tireless work of congressional staff, my congressional staff, together with the many dedicated teachers, doctors, administrators, advocates, organizers, parents, community groups, and other wonderful people who care and who have started grassroots efforts to stand up and make their homes, my district, a better place to live in. I've always believed that engaging the community leaders and creating partnerships, both public and private, local and county, state, and federal government officials is the way to achieve sustainable community development efforts along the U.S.-Mexico border region. In closing, Project Arise, highlighted in the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank's report, started as a woman-led organization in 1987 to empower female residents in the colonia of Las Milpas in Hidalgo County. I remember very distinctly in 1996 when I was campaigning, I got a message that Mrs. Ayala wanted to have merienda with me, and she was inviting me to come to her home at 3:30 in the afternoon for some pan dulce and some coffee. And boy, did I get a lesson. Did I get a lesson. It was the longest merienda I'd ever had. But boy, she was, when some people say one person at the right place at the right time, she was the one who changed Las Milpas from being one of the largest colonias into what is now incorporated into the city of Pharr, Texas, with paved streets and lights and potable water and lines to take wastewater out to the waste treatment facility. She was a dynamo. And listen to this. When I met her, she was 85 years old. So over the past 3 decades, this initiative has developed into a nationally recognized organization that serves over 1,000 families in some of the most needy communities. I'm excited by the focus of the discussion here today. While we have made great strides to date, there's still much work to be done. My district and the Rio Grande Valley, in particular, continue to be one of the poorest regions in the nation. We cannot continue to look at the community development issues in isolated bits and pieces. Only by taking a holistic approach to addressing the needs of our community can we hope to ameliorate the scourge of poverty. The colonias that we will be discussing that dot the Texas-Mexico border, from El Paso down to Rio Grande City in Starr County and Hidalgo County and Cameron County, provide an interesting case study. These are remarkable communities that sometimes lack the most basic living necessities, such as potable water, reliable electricity, wastewater services, paved roads, and access to education, healthcare, and city services such as fire and police protection. However, don't let the numbers fool you. Behind the statistics are thriving communities full of hardworking, and I mean successful entrepreneurial spirited people with strong family bonds and unlimited, untapped potential. I look forward to seeing what great ideas come out from today's panel, and I hope to work with all of you to implement some of these innovative ideas on the ground in South Texas. I wish to thank all the distinguished panelists, especially the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas and the Wilson Center, for your tireless work and dedication to making this a better world to live in. Have a great day. Thank you.
Couldn't have imagined a better introduction to the panel that we're about to have. Thank you so much for that. And you said twice a word that I think is going to help guide our discussion today, the word holistic. That we need holistic approaches to the development of these communities. And I think that couldn't be more right on. And it also presents a bit of a contrast to the way that the issue of the colonias has been historically tackled. I think that there's been early on, there was a very strong focus and needed focus on infrastructure, basic services, getting communities incorporated. But it's a much bigger question right now. I want to just say hi real quick to President of the Wilson Center, Jane Harmon, former colleague of Congressman Hinojosa, so they're going to.
How are you, Ruben?
Glad to see you, Jane.
I have I'm happy to get smarter by being here for a few minutes. Thank you, but when did this happen?
These things just happen naturally.
Hello, everybody. Keep talking, Chris,
Okay.
were you talking?
Yeah. So yeah, again, I think that the concept of holistic development is one that we'll be looking at and actually trying to describe what it actually looks like as we move throughout the panel today. I'm going to go now to Jordana, who will actually present the report, and then we'll move to have other presentations that don't just seek to respond and sort of comment on her the report, but also actually based on their experiences and actions and the work that they're doing, each of them in the border region or other panelists, will add to the discussion and add to that comprehensive, holistic view of what's needed to really promote community development in the Colonias and in the border region in general. But Jordana, we're just delighted to have you and have the Federal Reserve as a co-host of this event with us. Jordana Barton is Senior Advisor in the Community Development for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas San Antonio branch. Am I right? Did I hear that you're now based in El Paso, or are you still in San Antonio? Okay, great. She supports the Federal Reserve System's economic growth objectives by promoting community and economic development and fair and impartial access to credit in low and moderate income communities. And she's the author of this report, Las Colonias in the 21st Century, Progress Along the Texas-Mexico Border. So let me just pass it over to you. Take it away. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. How are we going to forward our presentations?
We can have somebody
Michelle, I'll take the
get you a
clicker.
clicker.
Thank you.
and I'll help you get it set up.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have the presentations up here. Great. Sorry about that. Oh, there.
I see it up there.
Oh, there. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris,
Push it.
for your introduction, and I have the clicker now and can take control. Thank you, Blair and Allison as well, for connecting this and seeing the strong connection to Habitat 3 and the UN, those efforts with the settlements and communities along the Texas-Mexico border. There's such a relationship with the work of Habitat 3 and so much to learn from each other. So I look forward to all the work with that going forward. And I know some of my colleagues at the Federal Reserve are working on that very issue. Barbara Lippman is one of them, and she's in the audience. So thank you very much. And certainly the idea of holistic development, that rose to the top in our research. And in fact, the people that are represented here today understand the intersections of the issues, and that's where the answers are. And as Congressman Hinojosa said, I'm from Benavides. I've worked with his staff on the border to conduct the study and connect with many important people along the border, including the people in the Colonia communities, the residents. So thank you so much for opening this event.
He's a really good member of Congress, isn't he?
Really good. It couldn't be more appropriate, as Chris said, to have you open this. And the Federal Reserve has enjoyed working with you in financial literacy, organizing the financial institutions along the border to serve the community. And so thank you for being here. It's very important to us. So let's look a little bit. I want to take you deep into the Congressman's district along the Texas-Mexico border. Our disclaimer is that the views expressed in this presentation are the presenters, that would be mine, and don't necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas or the Federal Reserve System. As the Congressman said, a colonia in Mexico, a colonia is a neighborhood. In Texas and the southwest border, it takes on a new meaning. And the Secretary of State defines a colonia as a residential area along the Texas-Mexico border that may lack necessities such as potable water, sewer systems, electricity, paved roads, and safe housing, and adequate drainage. So the study, in order to lay the groundwork for this discussion, I wanted to let you know that the study, we covered the 6 counties along the border that have the highest concentration of colonias, because we knew this could tell us a lot about the whole. But you also see all the shaded counties in Texas, including the one right next to Webb County, Duval County, where I'm born, where I grew up in Benavides, Texas, where there are colonias, but we focused in on the 6 counties with the highest concentration, from El Paso down to Cameron County. Hidalgo by far has the most colonias, almost 1,000 colonias. It's a 1,250-mile border with Mexico. And we looked at the issues of infrastructure, housing, economic opportunity, education, and health. As the congressman said, there's over 500,000 people living in the colonias. There are 2,294 colonias. 96% of colonia residents are Hispanic. 94% of those under 18 are U.S. Born citizens. 73% of all ages are U.S. born. 35% are foreign born. The median age, just like Latinos across the country, is 27. It's a young population. And 62% of colonia residents are living at or near poverty. So let's look at, first at infrastructure. A lot of focus, as Chris said, has been on infrastructure and the physical environment of the colonias. In the late 80s and 2000s, people were understanding the health risk posed by not having access to potable water, not having proper wastewater, as well as housing conditions that were substandard in these sometimes informal settlements that formed, and then infrastructure had to be brought in afterwards. The Secretary of State's office was asked by the legislature to keep track of colonias. They label colonias, and in fact, there's no way to take a colonia off the list once it's on the list yet. The legislature is probably going to be working on that. The green colonias, you can see there, the key to the right there, they have all the infrastructure, drinkable water, wastewater, and we've seen incredible improvement in infrastructure in the colonias, from 636 in 2006 that were green to 922, and then likewise you see the decline, 442 red colonias to 337 red colonias, and the red don't have any of the infrastructure. The main thing that the Secretary of State looks at is the top 3, the drinkable water, wastewater disposal, and legal plats. So for sure the red colonias don't have those top 3 forms of infrastructure. But we've seen great progress. But as Chris and Blair have talked about, we need to look below the surface and beyond the numbers and to the human element to see what does all this mean and how is it impacting people. Certainly great progress has helped people live higher quality of lives. But when you look at each county, it's different because of the geography. And I love that the Mexico Institute and the Urban Sustainability Laboratory are involved in this, because it is that intersection between urban and rural. And so you have different geographies in each county. So Webb County, 51.7 of the colonias don't have access to potable water. It's a huge geography. It's harder to get to some of those areas. And even some close to the city of Laredo do not have access. The Secretary of State's data that we were able to examine and analyze shows that 38% of people in just the 6 counties don't have access to safe drinking water. There are things going on the ground with colonia residents. Texas A&M University has this incredible program to build ceramic water filters, and they teach residents how to do it so they can have this filter, cone-shaped filter that they make themselves. They place it in a sort of a paint drum, plastic drum, and they put a little spigot at the bottom, and they have safe drinking water. It purifies the water and makes it 100% drinkable. So it's also important to remember that when looking at the infrastructure and the Secretary of State's data, it's all about health risk, right? Red is high health risk, green is a no health risk or lower health risk, right? So but that's not at all taking into account the quality of the housing. And I want to explore a little bit about that, and my colleagues will explore a little bit about some of the solutions around that as well. Homeownership in Texas colonias is 77%. It's above the state average. There's this belief in owning your own piece of land and building your house over time in many cases, in the case of the colonia residents. Contract for deed purchases are still common. We looked at the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs contract for deed prevalence project and examined that data. We find that they're still prevalent, not so much contract for deed in terms of developers anymore, although we're still seeing high levels of the use of contract for deed, but now consumer to consumer purchases are more common, and there's high interest rates. The report says 15 to 18% interest, and you can see, and the people on the ground are telling us even higher interest that they're seeing. And you can see that that makes it not such an asset building opportunity for the colonia residents. So they have this drive to own their own home, but it doesn't have the same value in the market. Now, I would argue that having their own home, it matters, right? It matters because they can focus on their human capital. They're all telling me, hey, we may not spend much on our house. We do it over time. They have that flexibility to do that over time. But our kids are going to school. And all the work that the congressman is doing with the school districts in that region, they're looking to the future. So in community development, we look for those ways that family household balance sheets can have flexibility. So there's some great things about that, which I think Jesse's going to talk about when he talks about the solutions that we've learned from colonia residents themselves for how to create sustainable housing. Only 11.7% use a bank or credit union to finance their properties. We have a very low unbanked and underbanked rate, which we talk about. Very high unbanked and underbanked rate along the border, worse than Texas is the worst, unfortunately, in that area, and certainly the border region and colonia residents are unbanked to high levels. So what's happening is that the increased prices of the lots. So in 1989, the Texas legislature made the model subdivision rules, and it was going to kind of outlaw colonias. It was going to make sure that counties had to require that developers would bring in infrastructure before they started any settlement or neighborhood. And they did so, but what's happening is that the lots are increasing, so you could get a lot for $5,000 in the past, now it's more like $30,000, and it's leading to increasingly to more and more substandard housing. So I'd be on the curb there in that top picture. I was standing on the curb with Queta Caballero from the Secretary of State's office, and I was like, okay, is this a colonia? She was like, no, this is not a colonia. Well, everything about it looks like a colonia. They don't have access to the infrastructure. She said, but it's here. The lines are there. It's a model subdivision. However, the people can't connect to it because they can't afford to, perhaps, or their house is not up to code and they have to pay fines for noncompliance. So unfortunately, you have a policy there that's very important, but at the same time, it can create a scarcity trap for residents who end up paying fines rather than putting money into their housing. And you see that people are increasingly, and it has been the case in the history of colonias, that people build on the same lot or several families to create an economy of scale and be able to afford to live there and share electricity and so forth. So we can kind of see the impact of some of those policies. And just to give you a sense of what the housing looks like in colonias, a lot of the pictures you see in maybe the New York Times or the Washington Post and so forth, they'll show housing in the colonias, but you don't get to see the variety. So we really documented across the colonias, across the counties, the different types of housing. So you could have a house like that one in Valle Hermosa in Starr County that looks like a house in San Antonio, except for the terrain you would notice. And then to the right, the homeowner has a salvage yard. And a lot of times we saw home-based businesses right out of the houses. We also saw a lot of hybrid homes. This is very common in colonias where an RV or a trailer home will have an addition. Maybe they had a baby and they needed more room or to add a bathroom and so forth, so they add in that way. And then you have a Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs bootstrap program completed by an organization, Ayuda, in El Paso, that's one of the affordable housing providers that serves colonias. And you see different types of housing. You see how they build over time in the upper left quadrant there. And it could be wood structure with pier and beam and with a cinder block addition. And then you have another hybrid home. And you can always see, we know that trucking and that industry, because of the international trade, is very important in the border. And you can kind of see what Colonia residents do with the big rigs and trucks sometimes that are outside of the little casitas. The most important thing to think about, and Jesse with BC Workshop, who works with Community Development Corporation of Brownsville, will talk about some of the things that they're doing. There's only 7 organizations serving colonias, so there's a need for more, to reach more people. Some counties don't have an affordable housing organization, nonprofit, to build housing in the colonias or to attract colonias to urban places with affordable housing. So this combination, this list of housing organizations is what we have at the present serving colonias. We have learned a lot about what works, which Jesse is going to talk more about. Having colonia residents build their own homes with sweat equity, going in with more equity, and Lower Valley Housing Corporation El Paso, all the way to Community Development Corporation of Brownsville, who Jesse works closely with. They have developed models that really work. The challenge is access to capital. The challenge is investment. They have some solutions where and definitely bring in the people element and learning from Colonia residents and their resourcefulness about how to build a housing and how to intersect housing and infrastructure.
Will the gentle lady pause? This Proyecto Azteca in Hidalgo County has won 2 national awards of $1 million for their innovative ideas. And when I first became a congressman, they were building 4 homes a month. Today, they can build 400 homes a month. Sweat equity, and it's something for you to look up and see how successful that has been. But I know I've been to Brownsville, I've been to some of the others in El Paso, and they too have some great ideas. But especially look at how creative Proyecto Azteca in Hidalgo County has been, because my county was 375,000 people when I got elected. Today, it's 850,000.
Maybe we should ask them to fix Congress.
We're going to look for all kinds of ways to tell the story, but it's definitely true. Proyecto Azteca, David Arismendi started, built the organization, and Cass now, incredible work of Proyecto Azteca, and really having residents build their own homes, learn about housing and infrastructure in those intersections to make it work and to make it really sustainable. So thank you.
And just before you showed this, you had 3 bullets that dealt with financial literacy and the importance that the Federal Reserve gives that knowledge of financial literacy. And they created LUPE for financing. And LUPE is the acronym for that Proyecto Azteca, because you have to have access to capital. And they could borrow $30,000 for lumber and supplies to build a frame house, and then get this result that we have seen over these last 20 years. And it's just one more reason why financial literacy needs to be taught at the schools and the community colleges and children as well as adults.
And
I'm sorry to
access to
interrupt
credit
you.
and understanding credit. La Unión del Pueblo Entero, Juanita Valdez Cox was on our steering committee, David Arismendi and others from Proyecto Azteca as well, to guide us in the report so that we could kind of learn about those models very well. So let's look at some of the data, poverty and near poverty in the Texas colonias. As I had mentioned, 62% of colonia residents are at or near poverty. Stark County in the 2010 census was the highest poverty region of the United States. So Very important to look at that. You can see the comparison of the colonias with their county, and the colonias have distinctly higher poverty than even their counties. Educational attainment, less than a high school diploma, 54.8% in the colonias have less than a high school diploma compared to the United States population of 14.6%. College degree or higher, 5.5% of colonia residents have a college degree or higher compared to the United States numbers. So you can see we're having challenges in educational attainment. A lot of work is being done, and we document that in the report, and progress is being made. And this is population 25 years and older. We want to know so much more about the 18 to 24-year-olds and what's happening at that level. And we look deeply into Far San Juan Alamo School District because they're an example of some of the great work that's asset-based approach in education to solve these challenges. Employment status is also important to look at. 50% are employed. There's 11% unemployment. An interesting number is a high number not in the labor force, 43%. What could they be doing to make ends meet if they're not in the labor force? Anybody? How could families make ends meet if they're not in the labor force?
They can sell pastries, they can sell candy, they can maybe tell someone who's producing pots and pans that they will take them, and when they sell them, they'll pay him or the producer. They're very creative and very hardworking. They can work 12 hours, 14 hours a day, and they do it because they have to. That's the only way they can put a roof over the head of their family and send the kids to school.
And definitely, so people
Flea markets are all over.
All over. The Colonia residents are entrepreneurial, and we looked at some of the data, and 90%, like it is in Texas, micro enterprises make up the firms in that region, micro enterprise and non-employer firms. Yes. Hi.
Can we get her a microphone, please? So people can hear her on the web.
I'm just curious about the data on the unemployment rate. Because thank you. It refers to population 16 and older. Is there a cutoff for the elderly? And I'm also wondering about other status. I'm noticing that it's 43% for the colonias, and I'm sure there's a high informal sector economy, which is what we're going to be looking at. But I'm also stunned by the 35% for overall United States as not in labor force, unless that means a lot of mothers, women at home, and elderly.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm not in the labor force. Have you got any further breakdown on those numbers?
Yeah, and so it is up to retirement age, 65.
So these don't include anybody over 65?
No, not the employment numbers.
Congressman, I'm going to take a guess that you don't count.
I guess that what?
You don't count. And we are going to take questions right after this, perhaps, to get through and to get through the panelists. So please remember your question, and I want to make sure we give it good attention. So people are entrepreneurial. They have stalls or puestos in the pulga. And they're even in Laredo, they go to the International Trade warehouse and they buy these pallets that have goods. They get a loan from Lift Fund. We used to be Acción Texas on the border. And for $500, they buy this pallet, and then they have goods, either clothing or cosmetics or little household items to sell at the pulga. And that's how they make ends meet. It's a place where they can move from informal economy to the formal economy. We saw stories of entrepreneurs doing just that, moving from maybe having a predatory loan or a alternative financial provider's loan that has high interest rate and keeping them trapped in cycles of high interest and not being able to build assets, to getting a safe fund with, safe loan with Lift Fund, and then a relationship with a bank like the woman on the right in Garciasville, Leticia Jones, who went from having informal finances to formal, and indeed a relationship with a bank. Arise, as the congressman talked about, has been very important in turning those numbers in education around. So they've learned from IDRA, the organization, the education organization in San Antonio. They've worked together to learn how to use data to make the case for their kids in school. They have, they won the PTA's, the National PTA's Award for Best PTA. They have a community PTA where they bring the administrators and people, like they did with the congressman, brought them to their home, to their offices in the colonias, and it started in Las Milpas. Likewise, I mentioned Far San Juan Alamo ISD. One of the things that keep people from the labor force is a limited English proficiency. And one of our scholars, Pia Arrhenius, did a whole study on this area, that for Latinos, limited English proficiency is the factor that is most important in keeping them in poverty. But what he knows, too, is that bilingualism is an asset, and there's a labor market penalty for limited English proficiency, but there's a labor market reward for bilingualism. And he knows that, and they offer a dual degree and certification in bilingual training. And he understands that binational region of the border and how important that is.
If I may interrupt you, this gentleman here is the superintendent of schools, Dr. Daniel King. When he was hired at PSJA, Far San Juan Alamo Independent School District, in our education committee in Congress, his school was listed as one of the top 10 biggest dropout high school factories in the country. They had a gang problem that was unbelievable. It was just a place not to be in. All this to say that this man came and within a 7 to 8 year period turned it around, and he has such an exemplary program, so successful, that he has come to Washington to receive 3 national awards, 2 from Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education, and 1 from President Obama. But what he does, and those are volunteers following him in the colonia, well, if not a colonia, just an area of Far San Juan Alamo. But he is just an inspiration when you hear him speak. He's come before our committee in education here in Washington, D.C., and has wowed both sides of the aisle because of what he has done. And gosh, they've offered him $250,000 or $500,000 just to move to San Antonio and to some other big cities, and he doesn't want to leave because he says that he is needed there in that region. And he's making a fantastic difference, really, really has. You ought to look him up, Google Dr. Daniel King, and you'll find out just how wonderful a leader he is.
Yeah, we definitely, interviewed him, visited the school, and tell a story in the report about a student that comes out of Far San Juan Alamo, and his zero dropout tolerance policy, his creating a college going culture, all of that is just, he's changing the way education is done, and really brings in the parents. He knows that that's how you can go even further. He provides training for the parents, engages them in the school in ways that are just so meaningful and making incredible progress. We have a report, a documentary on the report, and you can see an interview with him, and he talks about some of those ideas. So at www.texascolonias.org, you can see that video and kind of meet some of the people through that video. But I'll just end by saying that we explored the things that are keeping people from the labor market: the limited English proficiency, the lower educational attainment. In fact, the border region has the highest lack of broadband and internet connectivity in the whole country. So now we formed a collective impact group on the border of industry leaders in that field of broadband and connectivity, education leaders from Region 1 and Far San Juan Alamo and so forth, because we're going to close the digital divide. Too much economic inclusion is, digital inclusion is economic inclusion, and it disproportionately impacts low-income people and people with a lower education attainment. And so we know something has to be done about it, because 83% of jobs are online, and the report has inspired action on the ground to move forward on some of these issues and really connect to some of the efforts in this area. So we'll go on to my next.
Before you leave, I want to tell you something that in 1997, 1998 was my first term in Congress. I learned that the Rio Grande Valley only had about 10 to 12% connectivity to fast connectivity on computers. Al Gore had this program of eConnect, and he came down to see the Rio Grande Valley, as did President Bill Clinton in January 1998. And I made a big thing about the fact that we couldn't connect fast on computers and that we needed their help. Today, 70% of schools and cafeterias and libraries and homes have fiber optic line connectivity and so forth. And I read something yesterday where one of the greats, Warren Buffett, said, we are on the cusp of revolutionary changes because of information technology coming much faster than you think. Well, you can go back 20 years, and I could certainly attest to that. But because we have been able to get fiber optic lines to 3/4 of the area, which I've said doubled in size in these 20 years, our graduation rate, which was 55% in 1996, is now 85% high school graduation rate. Naysayers said that would never happen because that was such a poor agricultural region in the country. That's not true. You need, what I said earlier, complete holistic, the infrastructure and information technology. I've seen kids 3 years old and 4 years old that are so fast on the computers and the telephones and so forth. They're so smart, but somebody gave them that opportunity. So again, I just want to say that the potential is there. Bill Clinton says when he came down in 1998, and the last sitting president was Eisenhower in 1953, so you can see the neglect of our region. 1953 to 1998, we've never had a sitting president come to Hidalgo County. So he told Al Gore and he told Dick Riley, he says, when Congressman Hinojosa comes and tells you that he needs some help on a program on education, make it happen. And it's made a world of difference. The potential is just keep growing. And ladies and gentlemen, I've got 5 kids, and number 2 was Teacher of the Year at Far San Juan Alamo for the 3 and 4 year olds, early childhood development. And then they competed regionally from Laredo to Brownsville, and she was Teacher of the Year with 3 and 4 year olds. And she says, Daddy, I wish you could come and compete with my little 3 and 4 year olds on the computer. They'll beat you. That's the difference.
Yeah, and online, for the Federal Reserve, of course, banking is increasingly online. If we already have challenges with unbanked and underbanked in the region, we'll create worse challenges if we don't pay attention to the digital divide. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for the presentation of the report. And I think what the Congressman was just mentioning helps set the stage, because we're talking about the need for both sort of top-down, and what I mean by that in this context is the role of the federal government, and even in the case of the North American Development Bank, international institutions, but also bottom-up, and that's what Jesse represents here. And so I think what we're going to do now is go through the remaining panelists and have them present some of their work that's related to this set of issues that we're talking about here today, and then have some time for some discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce all 3 of them and then let them each make their presentations. Alex Hinojosa is a good friend of mine, Deputy Director of the North American Development Bank. He has extensive professional experience in investment banking, the utility industry, municipal project financing. The North American Development Bank, and he can explain it in a little more detail than I will right now, was created during the creation of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, to address issues of environment and environmental infrastructure in the U.S.-Mexico border region, and have done tremendous job financing projects and helping design projects throughout the U.S.-Mexico border region, including the Colonias, to help deal with some of the physical infrastructure issues in particular. So we look forward to hearing a little bit about the role of the NAD Bank in the region. We're also delighted to have with us Laura Gomez Rodriguez. She's the team lead at Brownsville for the White House Council on Strong Cities and Strong Communities initiative. And she comes from the Environmental Protection Agency, where she's had a long time working in the U.S.-Mexico border region, in other places as well. I think Arizona you spent a lot of time working in, as well as some other places. So has extensive experience in the region and is now full-time in Brownsville, coordinating federal efforts to strengthen the region and deal with some of the issues of poverty and community development. Very just delighted to have you with us here today as well. And then last but certainly not least, Jesse Miller, who will definitely be giving us the ground-up perspective, community-based perspective on the Colonias and community development in the region. He's the Associate Director of Building Community Workshop in the Rio Grande Valley, based out of Brownsville, Texas. He works with individual families on the designs of their homes, meeting with Colonia residents about stormwater solutions, hosting community design events, designing multifamily communities, really working with the communities themselves to improve the infrastructure, but also the community organization. He is a BS in Architecture and a Master of Architecture at Ball State University from Indiana, and actually also studied at the Tec de Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico. So has a binational component to his education. Thanks very much for being here with us today as well. Alex, let me pass it to you first, and we can head down the line and get a little bit more information.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good morning to everybody. As Chris said, my name is Alex Hinojosa. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of the North American Development Bank. They say that a camel is a racehorse that was designed by a committee. Well, our bank, the NAD Bank, was designed by two Congresses, the Mexican and the United States, because we truly are a binational organization, and we fall under international organizations under the U.S. government's definition. We were established in 1994, as Chris said, under the auspices of the NAFTA. Back then, the concern was the border region, the Mexican region in particular, along the border. And what the concern was is, if you remember that phrase, that there's going to be a great big sucking sound. I think it was by Ross Perot who mentioned it. Said all the businesses are going to go to the border, they're going to establish there, and they're going to ruin the environment. Well, how do you prevent that? Well, have an investment in infrastructure. And well, how do you get that done? Well, through a bank. And we were formed along with the Border Environment Cooperative Commission, which is basically they certify, they analyze the needs along the border, and we finance. We were capitalized 50-50 by Mexico and the United States at $3 billion. And we have the name of North American Development Bank, of a grand name, but really we only work on the border region. 300 kilometers into Mexico and 100 kilometers into the United States, serving a population of about 10 million in the United States and about 17 million in Mexico. And really it's, the 10 states that you see up there are the area we work in. What we do, three things particularly. We provide loans, which is a greater part of what we do. We provide grants, and then we provide technical assistance. The areas that we work in, by definition, again, under our charter, has to be infrastructure that has an environmental benefit. That includes water and all its components, wastewater, storm drainage, et cetera, solid waste, industrial waste, air quality. And under air quality, we have a lot of paving that we've done in this region. If you think about it, it's dry, it's got a lot of traffic, and so a lot of dust and other issues. We have become quite involved and very strong in financing clean energy. That's wind and solar, some biofuels, and waste-to-energy. We're looking for some waste-to-energy projects if some of these folks who are entrepreneurial in the colonias are interested. And energy efficiency, that's the public lighting and retrofitting. Now on grants, for a long time, we administered the Border Environment Infrastructure Fund. That is funds provided through EPA and on the Mexican side matched by CONAGUA and some of their programs to provide municipal water and wastewater infrastructure. Since the inception of this program, the BEEF, we call it, we've allocated approximately $632 million for 106 projects, of which $390 million are in the United States, and they have been designated for the development of infrastructure that is providing service to first-time users, meaning that they, before that they had no service. First-time users amount to about 6 million residents, benefiting from about 81 projects. Here's a summary, and I hope basically the investment that's been made is both in the United States and in Mexico, and you see the numbers. Anybody who's interested can give me their card, and I can send you the actual dollar amounts. The funding summary, very well distributed throughout the border region. This includes, like I said, the 10 border states. One thing that I should point out is that on the Mexican side, the statistics that we're getting right now from INEGI, their census, their Mexican census data, show that in the border states, about 99% coverage for water and wastewater. Not water, and about high 80 percentile for wastewater. That means that they are equal to the United States at this point. The states, that are not on the border are probably half of that, half those percentages. It is pretty impressive, and I have a lot of pride in saying that a greater part of that impact was investment by the North American Development Bank. And because in all these years, EPA was matching the dollars, the Mexican side, CONAGUA, probably put in more than their fair share into those states. So the coverage there is very, very high, and the industrial development that's been occurring in all these cities, Tijuana, Chihuahua, Juarez, and Hermosillo, Monterrey, has been great. A lot of jobs, a lot of great development, economic development for the region, and my background. When I first started working, I was a utility finance director. I was a CFO at the San Antonio Water System. So I got to see and work with a lot of communities in and around that area that didn't have service, and I saw what the development of water and water supply did to economic development. I remember San Antonio for a time in the 90s wasn't attracting industry, and because people would say, well, first question out of their mouth in economic development was, what's your water supply like? Later on, once things were fixed, as an example, when Toyota came in to build a big plant, they didn't ask that question. They asked, how cheap am I going to get the water? That makes a huge difference in economic development. That makes a huge difference in the lives of the people who live in the area. Later on, after that, I was an investment banker. I grew a firm out of Chicago and grew it into 9 states. And we were doing bond issues for a lot of towns and cities throughout the Southwest and the Northeast. The ability to do financing for the development of your communities is huge. However, a lot of the growth in the water and the wastewater section was being actually was done through the developers. So the cities didn't take on that responsibility of footing the bill. It was put on the development side. So during that time, I got to understand fairly well the model subdivision rules that Jordana mentioned, and I've seen that as a good thing in that, as a banker, I can tell you, or even on a personal level, that my home or the home of somebody is probably the largest investment that they will ever make. If they do so in a manner where they are going to lose that value, or because of the neighbors they will diminish their value, that's not a good thing. So I think that those rules that make it a more solid investment are very, very positive just for the individual, building equity, building assets. I've had some friends and who, for one in particular, his son was getting ready. He says, "I want to buy a house. I want to buy a truck." He had just graduated from high school. I told him, "Son, no, you don't do that. You go to school, you get your studies, then you do that." And the young man's an internal medicine doctor now. But that preparation of the person, that valuation of the home, the equity building is critical in the way I've seen communities build. And in our role at the NatBank, we continue to provide funding for programs, and more what we're seeing are the individual connections. Often, as Jordana showed in her numbers, communities or colonias have the water line in front of their home. In the streets, they have the electricity up above. But it's no longer a matter of access or having access to a water line. Now it's having poverty or being in poverty where you can't hook up. So a greater number of the programs that we've been doing in these last few years at the NatBank has been paying for connections. The problem with substandard homes is still an issue. The problem with substandard homes are being able to stay connected. I know that utilities will disconnect you if you don't pay the bill. So our programs, in community assistance, we also have some grant money that we provide out of our own revenue. And in that, we provide just, critical infrastructure development, and we sponsor small communities, especially, that just don't have, the water lines or the sewer lines. So in those cases, we are investing in the lines. But more and more, what we're seeing are just funding to be able to connect the houses to the infrastructure. One of the issues that we have that's ongoing is that our beef grant money is down to very, very small amount. I mean, we used to do about $80–90 million a year. We are now receiving for grant funds from the EPA and $5 to $10 million. That's very low for this whole border region and for 2 states. So we are supplementing it with our own revenue through the CAP program, but I think that the positive thing is that we are seeing the less and less of these colonia types under the original definition.
Thanks very much, Alex. Laura?
Well, good morning. So first, I would like to thank the Federal Reserve Bank for extending the invitation for me to be here, so thank you very much. And also for Chris and Blair for hosting us here today. Congressman Hinojosa, it's very lovely to see you again. and fellow panelists as well. I'm happy to be here because we are partners. I just want to talk a little bit about the Strong Cities, Strong Communities initiative. It's a place-based initiative that's new with the federal government. There are a lot of different place-based initiatives that are going on behalf of the White House, but this one in particular serves to really support capacity building between cities and cities. And it's White House-led, so it's based and housed under the White House Domestic Policy Council. Back in 2011, this administration really had a big conversation with mayors, members of Congress, local communities, NGOs, and industry and philanthropy about what was really the issues happening within cities. And with that was trying to find this need to connect, trying this need of how do we all coordinate efforts where we can really truly build strength for communities to be stronger and to be more resilient. And with that, in 2011, under this administration was the creation of Strong Cities, Strong Communities, and it is housed in the White House Council for Strong Cities, Strong Communities, and it's a White House-led partnership with 19 federal agencies. And as you can see, there are a couple of them there on the board. But with this, it was all in an effort to really harness the mission of everyone's respective agency in order to work better together so that we don't work in silos, that we're able to support each other's efforts. Because at the end of the day, when we as the federal government are looking at the American taxpayer, that's what cities are serving initially. They're local taxpayers, and their local taxpayers are the federal taxpayer. With that, there comes a variety of components. I'll be discussing the first two a little bit more in depth as we go along. But just to highlight, with SC2, there are cities that are designated under this designation, and they receive federal teams. These federal teams have directed points of contact from each of the 19 federal agencies. They serve on a part-time effort, either based here out of Washington or also within the region, dependent on each city and its location. But with that comes a team lead, like myself, who will physically, full-time, serve within the city itself. And my job and my role is to really coordinate amongst these federal agencies and also with the city directly internally as an organization to better harness some of the efforts and the understanding of our programs and where they can receive assistance. Along with that comes the access as an SC2 city as part of the National Resource Network, which was a program that was funded through HUD for the next 3 years to really house a technical consortium of all the different types of federal resources, other resources from philanthropy and other nonprofits who will able to provide assistance and peer networking. So where cities and cities can actually talk together and talk about some of the problems and the challenges and how they overcame them regarding some of the services that they're supposed to deliver. With that, we've also partnership with the German Marshall Fund and also the Corporation for National Community Service, also known as AmeriCorps, to really figure out how we can harness capacity building on the ground. As we know that cities and local governments are always short-staffed, also as well to really help serve the needs of the communities under community engagement. What better way to do so than with Americans volunteers? With the SC2 Challenge also came the opportunity of the Economic Visioning Challenge, which was sponsored through the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration, which is all about spurring that creativity and competition amongst entrepreneurs and new businesses. It was an incentive that was offered through the first and second cohort of cities that were chosen for SC2. And with that, they were able to receive some grant funding to be able to do that startup innovation or incubator of choice locally. So here's just some of the SC2 cities. Brownsville, Texas is one of 7 cities for the second cohort that was chosen for the Strong Cities, Strong Communities initiative. Even though I am based in Brownsville, this initiative is all about promoting regional cooperation. So Congressman, I have been to your district and I will say there's wonderful things happening there, and there's a definite good opportunity of figuring out how both counties can learn from each other. And with that, over the course of these two cohorts, there has been a total of $410 million in federal funds that have been reutilized effectively. So with these deployed teams, we have interagency teams, we work closely together with the city to help them improve their coordination, not only locally on the ground, but also ours, to help them fully understand how we work. Being 8 months deployed here on the ground, I've really learned a lot. I've learned actually lessons every single day in understanding that communities don't really know how the federal government works. They don't know how to get a hold of us, they don't know how to reach us, and they don't know what the resources that are out there. So this is definitely an eye-opening experience for us as a way of how can we do our job better as the federal government in connecting communities about these resources, just basically on information sharing. With that, we also provide technical assistance from a bottoms-up approach, working with cities, helping them to think more strategically, more creatively, that when they do get that federal grant, that as a source of capital, how to utilize that so it goes a long way, how to be able to create public-private partnerships, how to make the most of your conversations with industry or bring in philanthropy. That's some of the things that the federal government and within each respective agency can do, but the ask needs to be made. And so being on the ground, spending time with the city of Brownsville and their community to really kind of help them understand that about those asks and how they can be made and what's there has truly been very, very useful for them. With, as I mentioned earlier, the National Resource Network, it's a technical assistance program that was funded by HUD, and it's all about doing peer networking opportunities. With that, they're able to leverage private-public partnerships a little bit better by understanding what are some of the new trends in industry related to economic development, job creation, education, revitalization of urban communities, transportation, infrastructure, and so forth. And with this has been a platform that's now launched, and I've included the website there as well, so I encourage everyone to go ahead and take a look. But it's all really about helping cities connect with each other, because at the end of the day, cities are an entirely different culture of their own. And they know their issues. They're the experts of what's happening on the ground. And so sometimes what they need is another city who's been through it, who's been through those growing pains, who's done it differently. And being able to have those conversations more effectively through this network has been very, very useful. This past summer, I was able to accompany the city of Brownsville along with other cities in Miami, where the National Resource Network held its first consortium in connecting other cities. So Brownsville, along with other cities in the U.S., were able to pair off together and have some of those deep dive conversations of what are some of the challenges they're facing, and really realizing how to come up with some creative solutions. So some of the best practices and findings from this place-based model work of SC2 has been under 3 realms. From a human capital approach, mayors, who have been, with a strong vision, have found that their city employees working alongside federal employees and other actors as well has really encouraged them to think differently, because they're able to be cross-trained and cross-pollinated in terms of their operating culture, and they get an understanding of both cultures. So we as the federal government understand a little bit better how cities operate and what their culture looks like, and cities in turn learn how the federal government operates and what our culture is like. With that, we're also looking at a bottoms-up approach. Really trying to repair some of the relationships between cities and the federal government. We're both 2 different types of government. We're both very, very different, but we're also similar in very similar ways, because we're all public servants at the end of the day, and we're all trying to receive the same goals and same impact. So how can we better understand that direct impact that we're each having within communities? With that, city staff and partners are aware of some of the resources that are available. In addition, in terms of the federal talent, we as federal employees who serve on these teams, we're able to effectively target specific resources, or not only share what we're currently working on, but better harness the overall agency efforts, and how to truly strengthen a community. So here are just a couple of case studies with some of the previous and current SC2 cities. One of them, Fresno, California, where Mayor Swornigan's priority was about revitalizing downtown. And so what the SC2 team did through their different interagency coordination was really leverage different types of programs from the respective agencies in order to help that revitalization happen. And as you can see there, some of our highlighted partners with this team effort has been the National Endowment of the Arts and the U.S. Department of Transportation, looking at some of their grant opportunities and how to leverage some of those funds to really create that nice redevelopment. Rocky Mount, North Carolina, which is in our second cohort of SC2 cities, was all about trying to do connectivity. And I think, you know, this is kind of a theme that we're talking about here today, is about connectivity and how to really achieve that. And so in Rocky Mount, they were really trying to connect their neighborhoods together because they saw their people as assets, and they were being disconnected from being able to get those opportunities, whether it be access to health care, access to local economic development opportunities, and also being segregated culturally within this particular district. But with the SC2 involvement and the team there, through the different agencies, we're able to work together to provide technical assistance on a project called Moncton Mills Trail, which was all about promoting the cohesiveness of the two neighborhoods through walk-friendly and walkability efforts throughout the community. And in addition, also trying to connect culturally between these different segregated districts. So in relation to Brownsville connectivity, as we talk about colonias, in essence, SC2 is really trying to address some of those connectivity issues with regards to colonias and Cameron County and Brownsville, but not only in that specific area, but also regionally wide in the Rio Grande Valley. Because, you know, those of us who are in the RGV, as we like to say, the connectivity is already happening through transportation, the movement of people from east to west. You're already seeing now with the merging with the two new universities, the new university, University of Texas of Rio Grande Valley, that's really the merger of the University of Texas Pan Am and also the University of Texas of Brownsville. So you're having that transportation happen naturally and organically through just students and citizens living wide. So what does that mean for the region as a whole as urbanism continues to take shape here in this dynamic region of the U.S.? So for the city of Brownsville, for their SC2 work, they've identified 5 areas of where they're trying to seek SC2 technical assistance. And one of them is in environment infrastructure, economic vitality, human capital, community engagement, and city leadership. Now, these are all areas that I've been working in conjunction with the city to help redevelop. They were putting together currently an internal work plan that would focus on these different areas. But in essence, the process of what has gotten to identify those 5 areas has been truly, truly interesting, because we have really taken a really bottoms-up approach as it results between government to government cooperation. Through efforts led through the city and the city manager's office, they put out a call out throughout their city departments to really harness and put together an SC2 city team, where you had voluntary city employees who really want to work side by side with federal employees to implement some of the SC2 work that they want in progress. And with that, they were able to truly kind of cultivate an idea of what they want for building a strong foundation for a strong city and a strong community. And with that, I've worked with the city to facilitate internal workshops over the past 2 months to really identify these opportunities of where they want to go, and really looking at SMART goal setting. And with that approach, I mean, this has led them to really think about how they're going to really draft their first strategic plan as a city. Every city has a general plan of what they want and all the community input in, but the city itself has never really had an organizational plan to contribute to that comprehensive plan. So with just SC2 being present on the ground with the first 8 months, we've been able to really develop and help them come to light the area of being strategic and doing that strategic plan. And from there, they'll be able to harness out specific goals underneath those 5 areas of where the SC2 team can really provide some good technical assistance. But this approach is a little bit more than that, because as the process takes forward of developing this work plan, this is all about really looking at these peer learning opportunities between federal employees and also city employees directly. So we will be the facilitators with the city employees, along with the other city community identified actors, to really harness these conversations of some of these challenging efforts about economic development, about workforce, and really about creating these areas of opportunity so that everyone can benefit. Because at the end of the day, the people are the assets of the community. And at the end of the day, they're the ones going to be able to really drive the agenda and for the future of what they want for their city. So in essence, SC2 runs a course over 2 years, but will be there to really shepherd and facilitate those conversations on the ground to really create that strong city and strong foundation. So I thank you very much for having me be here, and happy to answer questions when we get to that.
Thanks very much, Laura. Go ahead, Congressman.
I'd like to compliment Laura for her presentation, because the city of Brownsville came up here just a few months ago, and they spoke with folks at the White House and learned about another component that you will probably add to your presentation, and that is your brother's keeper. That is an initiative that the president introduced and called 30 national leaders to the White House, and I was fortunate that I was one of them. I was representing the Congressional Hispanic Caucus of 27 members, and we learned about the fact that in Texas we have more prison beds than we have dormitory beds, college dormitory beds. Throughout the country, that seems to be a real problem. So Hispanic and African American boys oftentimes get lured into selling drugs, distribution of drugs. And the only way to stop that and to turn it around is this program, Your Brother's Keeper. And if you don't know about it, look it up. It's an initiative that's a part of the White House, the president's. And Brownsville came and learned about it here in Washington, and they added, it's not just public-private partnerships, it's public-private and foundations. So the key is to introduce parental involvement, the father and son, early, and to have fathers give guidance to their sons so that they stay out of the hands of those drug pushers and so forth. I won't go into the details other than to say that it is new and one that the president wants to really expand throughout the country. And I can tell you that he brought together some great minds to the White House that included sports champions and leaders like the mayor of New York with the Bloomberg Foundation, and 4 secretaries of his cabinet. And he invited the chair of the Black Caucus and the chair of the Hispanic Caucus. That included me. And ladies and gentlemen, this is something that needs to be added to every city, large city or region that wants to reduce the number of young boys of color winding up in prison or in jail. It's awesome, awesome. It should be added to your Brownsville, because they were qualified, they were chosen, and
Yes, Congressman, and we did, we actually did help the city formulate their task force and provide that support for them to actually, as the Mayor Martinez accepted the challenge, we assisted the city to really formulate a city-led task force so that it comes from the citizens themselves.
Well, congratulations to you for your work. We're going to be asking you to come to Hidalgo County because I've already talked to the White House, to Broderick Johnson, and he said that he's going to come down to the Rio Grande Valley in December, and we'll ask you to help us.
Happy to, sir.
Fantastic. Jesse, take it away.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas for the invitation, and also to the Wilson Center for hosting this morning. I'm Jesse Miller. I lead the Rio Grande Valley Office of Building Community Workshop. BC is a nonprofit community design center, and we're based in Texas. We have offices in Dallas, the Rio Grande Valley, and in Houston, and we have a new office here in DC. We are a group of designers and planners, and we use design and design thinking as a tool to improve places where resources are most scarce. And this is commonly referred to as public interest design. To better explain our approach to work, I'd like you to think about the world of public health. People in public health work so that each person can be healthy in their everyday lives, and that each person can have access to health services when they need them. In the Rio Grande Valley, there is a network of promotoras who help drive public health. They go out into the community to increase public awareness, and they keep abreast of health issues in the community. This is a way to think of public interest design. Rather than designers only being for those who can afford traditional design services, we believe that designers can help improve the everyday lives of people and should be available when specific community needs arise. And following the lead of the promotoras, the public must be engaged. We recognize that each individual has a voice and wants to shape their place. We recognize that we must pair our technical expertise with experiential knowledge, that people are the local experts and solutions should come about through them. So when we tackle tough issues, we know that individual groups can't work alone. And as designers, we definitely know this because we can make beautiful drawings all day, but they won't amount to anything without implementation. And so in our work in the RGV, we've made some great partnerships. We have a community development partner that helps us get things done, the Community Development Corporation of Brownsville. We work with grassroots organizing partners, Arise and Lupe, to help us have access to local experts. And we have a policy partner, the Texas Low-Income Housing Information Services, to help build an impact strategy. And those partners see value in working with us because we can help put thoughts to paper and add creative thinking to tough problems. So before I go and talk about some of the work we've been doing with our partners, first just a quick recap of the context of the valley. Population is growing. There are high levels of poverty. The poorest and the third poorest metro areas in the country are in the Rio Grande Valley. The topography is flat, and it makes the area prone to flooding. And many of those areas that are prone to flooding are the colonias. The colonias, as we've heard today, were unregulated subdivisions that made land available to the poorest residents. And one thing almost all colonias have in common is lack of some sort of resources. That can be infrastructure, drainage, paved streets, lighting and sewer, housing quality, or even access to fair and equitable home and financing options. So back in 2011, there was a group of community organizers and community organizations working to establish a community-led, resident-led planning process in the colonias. They wanted to set out a model plan of how do you address problems in the colonias. And they needed some planners and designers to help them gather information and envision it. So they asked us to join them. So together, we established a process of participatory planning. We met residents when they were available and where they were available in their neighborhoods. And with them, we identified issues they faced. We confirmed any assumptions we had and any findings that we came across. And we helped them prioritize issues and opportunities. And the first outcome was a set of plans, one for each colonia. And this was a tool for residents to share their story, a way for residents to communicate the challenges they face, the goals that they have, the opportunities that are available, and then really put those in a priority set. And our partners saw that architects can be useful. They saw that, especially our community organizing partners, saw that architects and planners can play a useful role. And that illustrated how a team who was doing good work asked, what is our team missing, and how can we be more impactful? So one of the main priorities that came out of this process was drainage. And that's easy to understand because a typical rain event in the valley can cause big problems. And that can be that's typically due to the flat topography, but also when your neighborhood is set up in a way where your property is the lowest point, it's not the road. So when we went about working with this with our partners, we asked, how do we build power in the colonias so that residents can advocate for drainage infrastructure, to advocate for change rather than waiting for solutions to come to them, to have the local expert lead the charge for change. So this isn't a design problem, it's a power problem, it's a knowledge problem. Residents don't know what options they have available to them. And drainage decision makers may not know the full story. And like I said, it's really working with partners, making sure we have a grassroots approach, making sure we have a policy approach so that we can really make use of the foundations who support our work. So we took a step and we really understood the context. We built up our technical knowledge. We mapped out all of the existing drainage and irrigation infrastructure in the valley. And then we paired that with experiential knowledge. We went out there and we engaged the community. And that first step was to print off a map of the neighborhood and ask people where it floods. Where does water drain when it floods? And what's interesting about this colonia, Spanish Palms, is that there's a drainage ditch over here on the right side of the colonia, but according to the residents, all the water goes to the left side of the colonia. So this was useful because people needed to be able to share that. So what we can do with that is we can use design as a tool to help envision how to get the water out of the colonia, communicate some ideas, some different options, and then have that design process where it's inclusive, where all ideas and solutions are run by the residents. And the outcome of this was, again, a series of plans, one for each colonia, that identified a stormwater strategy and a way of implementation. So these plans can serve as a tool for the residents to go and talk to their decision makers to advocate for a plan that they helped create. So throughout, we've been working with 6 colonias in this way, and throughout this process, we've built a network of residents, and we've learned from the local experts, and we've expanded our knowledge. So when we found out about a state-funded effort studying drainage in the colonias, and that their initial findings claimed that many colonias didn't flood, we knew that there was a problem. We assumed that they were probably relying only on the technical data that was available and weren't going with and weren't confirming those results. So we offered our help. We hosted 4 community workshops all throughout the valley to give more people an opportunity to share their voice. And we helped, on the design side, we helped to simplify the information, to help people have a visual thing to answer so that we could receive more answers. And over 200 responses helped to change the way that the state-funded study did their work. So rather than approaching each colonia in the same way, they incorporated a categorized approach to drainage solutions in the colonias. One of the most common resources that colonia residents lack is access to decent housing. Our development partner and many other development partners in the valley do make available many decent housing options to colonia residents, and they're good homes, but they do have a limited design catalog. And our partner, CDCB, recognized that the homes didn't necessarily reflect the people who live in them or the neighborhoods that they live in. So after the colonia planning process, we began working together, and our approach was sustainable house. And there are 3 goals that we have: to increase choice in affordable housing, to empower families through the decision-making process, and then to change perceptions of what affordable housing is and how it's done. So we know the need. We know it's difficult for a family to build investment in a home that doesn't meet their needs, but we know it's about people. We know that making decisions about a home are hard to make. They're big decisions. So you have to have a conversation that builds trust, that is based on open communication, and you have to get out there and work with people. You grab one end of a tape measure and the client grabs the other end, and you get to know them better, and you get to know the property. And from there, you build a conversation that starts with the most basic. You don't make assumptions, and you have a step-by-step process and an engaged process to confirm any findings. So, like I said, we have a couple of goals: to increase choice in affordable housing. And that's done in part by empowering empowering families to determine the value of their home. It's about recognizing that place is a reflection of people. So something small like building around someone's favorite tree rather than clearing the property is a small step, but it can mean a lot. It's about empowering families through decision-making. It's a house designed by the family and a family who is empowered to make decisions that shape their future. And then in changing perceptions of affordable housing and how it's done depends on communication with contractors, because they're the experts of building. If it's successful for them to build houses that are resident-informed, it's successful to keep building houses that way. And in opening up the conversation to more developers, architects, and municipalities, because the more people who are offering choice, the bigger the impact. So I've been talking about a partnership that we've been working with throughout the RGV. And there's one initiative that really pushed ourselves the hardest, and that continues to give back to make an improved impact. And this is Rapido. Rapido is a disaster recovery housing pilot program. And Rapido's story started with Hurricane Dolly in 2008. And then 6 years after that hurricane, there were still many families that did not have access to recovery. And we found ourselves in a position to really make an impact. And we didn't want to, like others have said, work in silos. We didn't want to work on design by itself or policy by itself or organizing by itself. So us and our partners, we zoomed out and we looked at that. We had seen the recovery process fail over and over many times. So how do we look at the model of disaster recovery housing? And we started seeing that the way that it's set up, it tends to cost too much. It tends to take too long for families to get back. And a lot of that cost and a lot of that effort doesn't have as much of a direct local impact as we thought it should. And there are some of the rules that are guiding that disaster recovery that help make it take longer and cost more, such as the Stafford Act, which basically says that FEMA and HUD can't work together on disaster recovery at the same time, that FEMA money comes first for temporary, and then HUD money comes after for permanent housing. So we asked, is there a way to redirect that time and money so that less time is spent after a disaster getting families back home and more money is spent at the local level getting families back? So with our partners, we developed a pilot program with two main sides. There's developing a model which makes policy recommendations and creates an implementation strategy. And then there is a design model, or a design part, that can fit into that model, but can be adaptable to different regions, neighborhoods, and families. So first I'm going to talk quickly about the design. It's based on a temporary to permanent solution, where the shelter that a family gets after the disaster works as the temporary home, but then it can be added on to become the permanent home. And we call this temporary unit the core. So after a disaster, the family moves into the core. A short time later, the house is added onto while the family stays in the core. And then that becomes the permanent home. And by having this approach, this gets to recovering the neighborhood. It gets families back into their neighborhood so that the neighborhood survives. It has a custom design process to adding on to the home so that the permanent housing is a reflection of the families and of that neighborhood. It's not just a cookie-cutter approach to disaster housing. And then we thought, well, how can we keep the rebuilding super local? The core is made up of a series of floor, wall, and roof panels made of typical materials. And these panels are made in a local lumberyard with local contractors in 3 days. And then the panels are moved to a site, they're put together, the core is ready to live in, and then the core can be added onto. So Rapido helps to rebuild the local economy as well as putting families back home. So there's the Rapido system where each team member has an important role to play, especially around community organizing, policy recommendations, and design to help make all of those processes work better together. And we call this system pre-covery. And there's a pre-design component that means having a housing plan in place before a disaster strikes. And that happens at different levels. At the regional level, different regions have different requirements for building, such as related to climate and codes. So each region can select the type of core that's appropriate for their region. At the neighborhood scale, residents design and decide what type of housing fits their neighborhood. So they have meetings with planners and designers to determine what recovery housing will look like. And then with each family, there's a custom design home process so that each family shapes what home they live in. It's about pre-procurement and having cores ready to build, ready to go before a disaster, but also having teams ready to build more cores locally after a disaster. And it's about preparing teams who know what their role is and what to do before and after a disaster. So in this pilot project, we set up the theory and then we tested it with 20 families affected by Hurricane Dolly. We tested the organizing, making sure that people knew what they needed to do in order to get access to funding. We looked at the policies and the hurdles. We wrote down every time that a policy made things more difficult for families to recover, so that we could make a set of policy recommendations. And then there was the design and the construction. 20 families participated in the design process, 20 families participated in the pilot program. All of the homes were completed last spring, and this is a way of increasing choice into disaster recovery housing. So in closing, we believe in design justice through community engagement. We believe designers can help improve everyday lives of people, and that the public must be engaged, and that voices need to be heard to really know goals, no challenges, no assets, and no opportunities. But we also believe in designing justice through community engagement, that by engaging the community in all disciplines is what will lead to social justice, environmental justice, and more equal opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jesse. It's amazing. To all of our panelists. We have just a couple minutes. We're really running up against the wire here, but I do want to give you a chance to ask a couple of questions. So maybe we can just take one round of about 3 questions and then go back to our panelists for just final sort of closing remarks and answers to the questions.
If I could just first clarify the question that came about employment, the 16 years and older and the employment category is 16 years and older. It's all. What I was thinking of was that indeed, not in the labor force, people that are retired are captured in that. Okay. So just to clarify.
Thank you. Great. Do we have a question here? If you could just identify yourself and please keep the question brief.
Yeah, sure. Patricia Fagan, Georgetown University. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and I especially admire the local participatory approach, which leads me to the following question. When you achieve the successes that you have been describing and people are capacitated and able to move forward, do you have an issue? Do you have a problem? Do you have a solution for the temptation of those very newly capacitated people to move onward and outward out of the community, and how do you deal with that?
Thanks. Yeah, if you just want to pass the mic to her, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yue Zhang, I'm a fellow at the Wilson Center. Thank you so much for the wonderful panel. My question is about the informal economic sector. So like Jordana mentioned, about 40% of the labor force are actually informally employed. So I'm actually wondering, what is the policy toward the informal sector from the city level, from the state level, or even from the federal level? Because we know in some countries, the government are more concerned, so they are more controlling. But in other places, you see a more open attitude. So I wonder what's the policy there. Thank you.
Thanks. And great. Let's go back to our panel for answers and any closing remarks you'd like to make.
I'd like to answer that last question.
Yeah, please go ahead, Congressman.
Those in the majority today in Congress want a smaller government. And when you have a smaller government, there is lack of federal employees to be able to account for those who you said are they show that they're unemployed, but they are actually working and selling and doing what they can. So that will not change. There is a constant cutting of the budget, like they did last night when they said that they would, the White House and the Republican majority said that they would agree to a 2-year budget. And they're going to increase it some number, $80 billion, but the offset is going to be to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Well, who's going to get hurt on the cuts? And also, there are so many things that have happened since the sequestration that occurred 5 years ago, and that was to reduce the employment, do not replace those who leave the federal government, And that will continue because they've cut our budget, first 30%, then 20%, then 10%. And we have not been able to see even the COLA during the last 6 years increase for federal members of Congress. There's been no raise and so forth. So many are leaving simply because they just can't make it on what is being paid. So those are problems that are not going to go away, a reduced federal government, simply because the cuts are being made and the money is being given to the military, to the Department of Defense. There were no cuts made to them. In fact, I voted in favor of approving the military budget that was 600 billion to 600. They wanted 680 billion and they got 620 billion, but no cuts. So it's the non-defense programs that are being reduced in funding, and so that makes it extremely difficult for somebody to account for that question that you asked.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I can add a little bit to that. Well, entrepreneurship is one of the routes to going from informal economy to the formal economy. HUD, for example, just did a major grant to LIFT Fund, the major microfinance organization in Texas and actually the Delta region now. So there's those policies matter, right? How we support entrepreneurship, because we see time and time again, they've documented the stories of how you move somebody from the informal to the formal and to a relationship with a bank, right? And the Federal Reserve likewise is interested in people accessing financial services, working hand in hand with the Congressman in Region 1 Educational Service Center in financial literacy. So those policies that we have, the fact that we have a Department of Community Development that cares about how people participate in the economy and financial education through building wealth of the Dallas Fed, for example, the whole program for teachers and students, and Region 1, thanks to the Congressman, has been very involved in spreading financial literacy. And then CRA in general, banks investing in community loan funds and in their communities, and making efforts through financial education and capability to have people participate in the economy. And I think when Jesse says, when they're developing the Rapido homes, that they're using local people, we need to take that to a whole new level. We need to take that to how do we have manufacturing in the colonias, in that region, so that people can access jobs. How do their needs tell us? The way BC Workshop and Community Development Corporation of Brownsville and Proyecto Azteca listen to people and are learn from people, that's where our industries can be. That's where our manufacturing can be, to have people, to create an inclusive economy, basically. So those policies are going to matter. And I know we haven't addressed your question yet either, but I want to make sure that.
Yeah, does somebody else want to jump in?
Sure. So I'll add a little bit to this last question and also address the first question as well. So adding to what both Congressman and Ms. Barton added about looking at local level, I can't give a direct answer in terms of actual policy, but what I can say is how can the federal government is starting, with this initiative that we're working on with SC2, is harnessing the actors that we have here at the table with the city and the local economic development corporations and workforce corporations and other actors and other NGOs who are relatively important to the conversation to really start the conversation on how to create those local economies, how to look at the transition of those informal economies as assets, and what are the challenges from making to that transition, and then what are the next steps to where local municipalities can support small business through the aid of other resources, whether it be the federal government or whether it be private resources or philanthropic resources. But being able to just harness the conversations and where municipalities have a role, where everybody has a role from their own the respective parameter, is just as important to getting towards that answer. And related to your first question, part of really looking at how you prevent brain drain from a region, that's exactly what we're doing with the city of Brownsville, is targeting city employees and others who are hungry for wanting to be the next new city leaders in government, who are passionate about public service. Because for those of us who are federal public servants, we got into public service because we wanted to serve people. And so when we ask the question to city government employees, why do you come into work every day? Why do you chose to do this career path and not another? It's for the same exact reason. So how can we better empower them who are hungry for that knowledge and wanting to make a difference in their community, be trained and in our own craft, but also understand the resources that are available, and how to also understand the assets and resources they have locally within their community that they didn't even know about, such as these organizations who are already there doing this good work on the ground. And it's about helping them connect so they can peer learn from each other.
And to touch on the first question a little bit, more inclusive processes, one of the strategies around that is that it helps to build ownership in creating, whether that's a place or a policy. For example, the grassroots organizing groups that are in the Valley, they have a lot of people who show up for every meeting because they see progress that they help create. And there are more and more young people participating in that who see that there can be more future there are more opportunities for them in the future.
So we're over time already, but go, please.
I think the American experience is mobility. So if folks have opportunities wherever, be it in their own community or elsewhere, that's great on one hand. On the other hand, it comes back down to what is the condition of your community. Do I want to stay there? Do I want to live there? If the governments, local governments, are doing what they're supposed to and developing good, livable communities, then people are going to stay there and enjoy that. That's school districts, that's parks, that's jobs, etc. But the issue of financial equity is also important. I think that, as I said earlier, is the home is usually the largest investment a family will make in their lifetime, and so if they can do that in a wise manner and that does create some asset, it's going to help them in the long run.
On that question of Georgetown University, if housing is the biggest investment that the family will make, the investment in higher education will be the second largest. And I would suggest that you work with me and my staff on recruiting more students who have great potential from the Rio Grande Valley to come to Georgetown University, because I know the quality that you have. I have sitting very close to you a young man from the Rio Grande Valley, Robert, raise your hand, who graduated from your university law school, working in my office, doing a great job. And I've seen Senator Chuy Hinojosa, Texas State Senator Chuy Hinojosa, the leader in the Texas legislature who helped merge Brownsville and Edinburgh universities. He's vice chairman of the finance committee in the state legislature. Graduated from Georgetown University Law School. So what I'd ask you to do is work with my staff and let me bring 25 and 50 more students from the Rio Grande Valley on scholarships, because they can't afford what it costs to go to Georgetown University. And that kind of an investment will have double, triple, quadruple return on investment. I'm telling you, the potential in our Latino and Latina young men and women is just absolutely amazing. But getting into the universities is so very difficult and expensive. So that would be the only response that I can give you to your question.
Thank you very much to all of you. The one thing I just have to add very, very briefly is we at the Mexico Institute have spent a lot of time thinking about the border not as a challenge to growth and to community development, but as an asset to growth and community development. And so I think the other asset that I really want to put on the table here as we close the conversation is that the relationship with Mexico and the proximity to Mexico the manufacturing presence in Mexico, the trade that's moving through the area because it's along the US-Mexico border. These are all assets that need to be fully tapped into for community and economic growth in the border region as well. And these are really truly communities that are one community, but happen to have an international boundary running through them. So all of these planning processes that we're talking about, when we get to a, neighborhood level is one thing, but when you step out and take a little more macro view, we really need to be thinking about that at a binational level as well to take full advantage of the assets on both sides of the border for the development and improvement of all residents there. Thank you to all of you. Let me just turn it back over to Blair Ruble to make some very brief closing comments as we...
Chris, thank you. And you actually sort of tipped the hand that I want to play. I want to go back to where I began by the reference to habitat. And I think, when we talk about human settlement, one of the really fundamental challenges we have, both intellectually and practically, is there's nothing more local and place-based than settlement. And yet, when we begin to see similar phenomena play out across the planet, we have to understand we're not just dealing with the local, we're dealing with the global. And we really need to think in new ways about how to make these connections. And I think this report is really very exciting because embedded in it are ideas and new ideas about how the global and the local connect, how the large system challenges actually relate to where a drainage ditch is located in a specific community. And I think that that is a very exciting lesson to come out of the report and the discussion. We need to rethink about what we mean by community. Communities are open. They're open in a couple of ways. One way in which they're open is they're global. Now, a couple of days ago, I got an email from a colleague of mine in Kiev, Ukraine, who had seen we were going to do this event and wanted to get his hands on this report for the Ukrainian government. That's global. And the reason for that is he has colleagues in the Ukrainian government who are dealing with some of the very similar issues. Different context, but again, the global comes together with the local. And another way in which our understanding of community has to change is we have there's an intellectual notion that a community is a bounded place and it looks a certain way. And yet very few communities in the 21st century look the way traditional concepts of community think that they should look. And in fact, the kinds of communities we're talking about are not pernicious add-ons to some formal economy and some formal city. They are the 21st century community. And therefore, we shouldn't be asking questions about formal economy and informal economy. There aren't boundaries here. We shouldn't be asking about formal communities and informal communities. We should be talking about the relationships between. And this report goes a long way in that. And the third point I wanted to underscore is that for the past quarter century, we've been doing comparative urban work here at the Wilson Center. And one lesson I've learned is that the single biggest assets that cities have are people. Now that sounds that shouldn't be a discovery, and yet it is. And I'm reminded with a comment that was just made, a few years ago we had a big international conference on global urban poverty, and we had all these reports and specialists and so on and so forth. And we asked a geographer from Cape Town University to review all the reports and make an assessment. And her name is Sue Parnell, and she began with something that really stuck in my mind. She said, look, I've read all the reports. They're very interesting. But fundamentally, there's only one question that matters. Would I want my child to live in this place? And once you ask the question that way, you end up with this report. You end up with the policies that the congressman has been talking about. Because the only way you create a place where you want your child to be is to think holistically about what community development is. So for all of these reasons, I'm really excited by the report. I'm proud and honored, Chris, that we were able to work with you on the report. And finally, I want to go back to my Ukrainian friend for one last comment. The name of his country, Ukraina, means on the edge or borderlands. And I think what this report and what is happening now in Ukraine also underscores is the periphery is actually the center. It's on places like the Rio Grande Valley where innovation is taking place and change is taking place. And I'm really glad that we were able to highlight that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So interesting.
Yeah, thank you for staying. It's great that you were able to join for the whole time. Jump in. Yeah.
Meetings to this afternoon.
We really appreciate
glad I
that.
did.
That's fascinating stuff.
Interesting.
Beautiful.